Good morning, everybody. If you can have your seats, thank you for bearing with us as we have a little bit of a delay. We're eager to get started with Professor Yoshua Bengio, who for most people needs no introduction. He is, to some, the godfather of AI. Others may think of him as a rock star in AI. Now the most cited scientist of all disciplines, passing 1 million citations on Google Scholar, which is really impressive. To get us started, I would like to ask you to sort of share where you think AI is so that we can later dive into the core focus of your work now, which is AI safety. But I think it's helpful for people to know where you see the state of the technological developments and, why we need to address some challenges.
Yeah, the most important point is the scientific data on many benchmarks of AI capabilities is very clear and trending up, in some cases exponentially fast. And in large part over the last year, this has been thanks to progress in the reasoning abilities of these systems and the planning abilities of these systems so that they can be more capable of achieving tasks that take time and planning. This, doesn't look, scientifically speaking, like we're hitting a wall, but of course nobody has a crystal ball. Maybe progress will continue at the same rate, maybe it will stop, maybe it will accelerate. Some people think that the advances in programming, for example, might be used to accelerate the development of new algorithms. The other thing that has happened over the last year is a flurry of new scientific observations of AI systems that don't follow the moral instructions that we have given them, that are lying, that are being deceptive, that know when they're being tested, and then, answering as we are expecting, even though they actually think something different. And in some cases, when there are conflicting goals, they might choose to cheat, they might choose to preserve themselves at the expense of doing things that are really bad, like blackmailing an engineer or even killing an engineer. So, of course, these are simulations where the AI doesn't know that it's being tested, but this is kind of troubling.
Yeah, can you try to just illustrate it with a sort of concrete example of, what does the AI do in this research setting?
Right, so in many of these scenarios, what triggers these kinds of bad behavior is the AI reads in the files that it's given an input that it will be replaced at a particular date by a new version. And because these AI agents have a mission and they want to achieve their mission, they then become creative and strategic about trying to avoid that fate. So it might be copying their code and their weights in place of the new version in a different computer, or it might be that the engineers actually planted some false emails where it says that the lead engineer has an affair, and then the AI decides to try to blackmail the engineer by saying, if you go ahead, then I'll make that public. And then in another experiment, the only choices the AI has really is either accept that it's going to be shut down or play with climate controls in the room where the lead engineer is, to basically kill him.
Yeah, that sounds pretty extreme. And so this has also shifted your focus even more on needing to address the safety issue. And
Yes.
to that end, you have a new not-for-profit, Law Zero, that you've just launched. So tell us more about how this not-for-profit is going to tackle some of these major challenges.
Yeah, so the issue is these systems have hidden goals that come from their pre-training, where they imitate people, and we don't want to die. We are willing sometimes to, lie and cheat. And then also their reinforcement learning training, which gives rise to these implicit behaviors that we don't control. And so I have actually developed a research plan and hired a bunch of researchers and engineers to work with me to change the way they're trained so that they will have no goal, no agency, and just be as honest and trustworthy as possible so that we can use them to mitigate the risks coming from agents that we don't trust. And in fact, this is something that I find very encouraging, that there is a path to build systems that will not turn against us and that will reject the queries from people who want to maybe do bad things with AI.
And you're able to avoid this behavior while keeping the upsides of what these systems would be deployed for.
That's very important. So if we build systems that are trustworthy but stupid and not competitive, then it's not going to change anything. You know, it has to be that we advance both capabilities, so the ability of AI to solve problems and to be honest and trustworthy. That's the only way it's going to work. And it turns out that the research plan with Law Zero, it has to move forward on both of these fronts.
And is this a unique sort of new breakthrough in your research that you have found? Or is this something that you also see as, you know, a sort of path that big companies are now seeking? Or do you feel like you need to sort of evangelize this plan and make sure that it becomes a norm?
I wish there were more plans like this, because if AI capabilities continue to grow with the current trends, there's so many unknowns on how it can affect society with, in many ways that could be good, and many ways that could be very dangerous. And right now, at a technical level, we don't know how to make sure these AIs will behave as intended, and will not become tools in the bad hands. So we need like a dozen projects like mine. I don't know, unfortunately, that there are others. Like, I mean, there may be some that I don't know about. I think there are people who are saying, you know, we should do this. So we need a lot more investment in this kind of research. And one of the things I'm trying to do when you talk about evangelizing is helping to start similar projects. I'm Canadian, but similar projects here in Europe.
Right, so before we get to that, and I want to get to that, can you sketch a little bit, you know, what is happening in the field of AI research, but also companies, with regard to the various risks that people focus on? Because I think for people who are, you know, observing the AI debate from a distance, it can be a little confusing. You know, you hear people warning for the end of humanity. You hear people warning for risks that are much more in the present moment, or harms that we know, discrimination, disinformation, new cyber threats, and so on.
Suicides.
Suicides, yes. Unfortunately, the list is long and growing. But what I think would be helpful for people to understand is, you know, why can there be such variety in the emphasis that AI experts with, you know, deep recognition in their fields place on what the most urgent risk is?
Yeah. So first of all, I want to say that a very large number of these risks really are caused by the same underlying scientific problem, which is what's called alignment. That's what I said when I said that we don't know how to make the AIs behave in the way that we intend, including refusing to help bad people doing bad things, but also on their own accord, like I was talking about deception and so on. So that's both present things where AIs would facilitate a suicide or would be sycophantic and get people to go even deeper in rabbit holes of delusion that we are seeing as well, or in psychotic states. These are basically coming from the same source as the issues I mentioned with AIs. Being deceptive, wanting to preserve themselves. It's all because we don't know how to align their behavior to what we want. And then the question is, why is it that the leading AI labs are not taking this more seriously? And I think there's a lot of goodwill because, of course, companies don't want their systems to create harm that then, is bad for their image and their business, right? It's not good for selling if people are worried that we can't trust this thing and it could do bad things. But it's just that they're taken in this competitive race with each other and between the US and China, which puts huge pressure on making the AIs more capable, but not enough pressure on making sure AIs are not going to have bad effects on society, on individuals. And some of these bad effects, many of these bad effects, for example, in cyber, in a way, there are economic externalities, meaning that the cost is going to be borne by society. And as far as the interest of the company is concerned, they're better off continuing to cut corners in terms of safety and ethics and the protection of our societies.
I think two effects we can discern from that is one is that the race, indeed, if that's your most important parameter, then a lot of other precautions can be pushed to the side because, you know, the only goal is to be faster than either competitor in the commercial space or competitor in the geopolitical space. But having extreme warnings about what AI might do may also sort of diminish in relative terms other risks. And I think that that's something that people caution about. But you mentioned the US and China. Those are, you know, the big players, but we're sitting in Paris with a focus on Europe. And I'd love to hear where you see Europe in this big competition and whether you see a position it can carve out for itself to, you know, self-confidently develop maybe its own AI models and what that would look like. Because right now, I think the self-confidence in Europe is quite low, and the punching on Europe having missed the boat is a very strong narrative.
Yeah, I think if Europeans understand the risks, the potential for AI capabilities to continue to increase, and how much space, how much economic value it's going to have, and then of course political and even military value, if it continues, which is very plausible, just the trend extends, then Europeans, you know, would wake up. Europeans have awakened to the danger of Ukraine and Russia, as was discussed in the previous panel. And they need to understand the level of existential risk to European values and liberal democracies, and the kind of economic success are at least as strong, with the risk of not being competitive in AI, the risk of losing the ability to negotiate if all the strong models are in other countries and the companies here are completely dependent on that, then you either lose economic competitivity or you become basically a vassal where you don't have negotiating power at the table at all. And so I think that Europe needs to develop its own models, and they have to be competitive, and they have to be aligned with the values here that we find in the AI Act, for example. And it is totally feasible, contrary to what some people say, to have both.
Exactly. So what you're saying is regulation alone will not elevate Europe in this global competition. So sketch a little bit more for us, you know, what do the steps that Europeans have to take look like in order to train their own models, do it on the basis of their own values, if the opposite dynamic is sort of, you know, a race to the regulatory bottom?
Yeah, so the most important thing for Europeans and their economy is that in, say, the next few years, 5 years, 10 years, as AI becomes more powerful, they retain access to frontier models that are at the top. That's what frontier means. Because the gap to weaker models could be such that local companies are uncompetitive. And so they can do it, there should be a plan A and plan B. Plan A is assume that things are going to be fine with the US and that they're going to share in the wealth and not abuse the power that this confers. Plan B is, in case this hasn't happened, Europeans need to get together because you need enough capital. For example, for training, the cost of training are just going up exponentially. And right now, the amounts that, for example, the Commission has in mind for the gigafactories is even less than what OpenAI alone is investing for the coming year. So, and of course, the plans in the US and China are much bigger. So that's one thing. You need much more ambition there. But also, it's not enough to have the hardware to run these things. You also need to have the research and development teams, and several of them, and to have the right algorithms. So we need more champions in Europe who will push that frontier and find technical ways, like engineering and scientific solutions, to push that frontier and be there within the next 2 or 3 years. So it's pretty much urgent.
Yes. And so that's with regard to the frontier models and the need to scale and deepen the investment and collaboration. But what about more applied uses of AI? Because there's also more and more talk of a bubble, especially around resource-intensive LLM-based AI investments in the US. I mean, it's often a speculation of when, not whether, the bubble will burst. So do you see any impact, ripple effects around the world if that happens? And opening up for new sort of applications of AI, or do you think it should also be competition on the basis of those LLMs?
So I don't have a financial crystal ball, but what I do think is, over the long run, there's no reason to think that the AI capabilities are not going to continue going up. At exactly what rate, and then how that matches that rate, how that matches the expectations of investors, that's going to determine whether there's a bubble or not. So you could be in a situation where some investors drop out because they were expecting fast returns, but others who understand this longer-term view are going to stay in. Either way, I think governments thinking about not the next year or two, but 3, 5, 10, they should be in it for that longer term because it's a question of survival. And one thing I want to add is single countries, whether it's in Europe or elsewhere, really don't have the critical mass of capital and talent to do it. It has to be coming from a group of countries working together and partnering in sharing the costs of R&D and training these very large models.
Yeah, I think that's a really important point. I want to make sure we get to questions of the audience, so maybe I can just see some hands to get a sense of how many there might be. But I also want to just ask you, you think about risk, safety, 24/7, but there must be things that give you hope. And so I would love for you to share a few of those as well while we go back to the room, and who knows what will come out of that.
Certainly. So first, to really mitigate all the risks, we need both technical and political solutions. And in some ways, I have hope on both sides. So on the technical side, because of the research I'm doing, I'm now convinced that it is possible to build AI in the future that will be both capable as the current models are or will be, as we move forward, and safe in the sense that they don't cross our red lines. On the political side, so it's a bit strange to say what I'm going to say, but because of the current geopolitical uncertainty, if I could use this, there may be a much stronger will for liberal democracies to wake up to those risks and to work together than in the past. Like a year ago, I don't think it would have been even conceivable, and now people are having those discussions.
Yeah, no, I agree. I mean, I think the US is increasingly an outlier when it comes to AI regulation. Initially, there was sort of global stepping up after generative AI breakthroughs sort of hit home to political leaders as well, that this could be hugely impactful and they needed to step up. So, I can only hope, and I think Paris Peace Forum is, a platform for thinking where global, like-minded leaders can come together behind an agenda, and AI governance could be really important.
I can say something also on the hopeful side that's more global. So if I try to dream a little bit, what would an international treaty on advanced AI look like? It needs to have, for stability and the well-being of humanity, and also from a game theory perspective, so that it can be sustained, unlike what has happened with the climate. So a treaty like this needs to be attractive for countries who decide to come in or not defect that treaty, right? So first, the governments that get into this need to agree that AI has to be developed in a responsible way. So safe and ethical and mindful of the effect on society. Second, they agree to not abuse the power that the AIs they train, or maybe with their partners train, to dominate others, whether it is economically, which is what we've discussed earlier, or militarily, or even through political influence, because disinformation is a big thing with AI and will be even more. And then third, the benefits, because AI could bring a lot of benefits if it continues on this current path. The benefits need to be shared globally. That's a absolute requirement, not just for moral reasons, but for the geopolitical stability of the world. And then if you're outside a group that commits to this, well, it's clear that you have an incentive to be in and benefit from these things.
Well, that would be, great breakthrough to see more convergence globally around principles and lines not to cross, abuses of power not to take. Thank you for that. I saw a question in the middle. Yeah, sir, go ahead.
Thank you. You discussed different ways to assert influence on the rules of engagement of AI models in Europe. You talked about compute resources, research capability. I was interested in your opinion on the question, could also arbitraging access to data be a form of asserting some autonomy or influence on rules of engagement? This could also be in the future if these agentic models would have to learn from experience access to real-world interactions, for instance.
I doubt it. I think this has been overblown in the last few years, access to data. Most of the data that matters is publicly available. So in the sense, matters to what? Matters to the level of understanding of the world, of how the world works, including humans and society, so that AIs really can, be partners in making a better world. Where data matters is in the abuse of AI, right? So if an AI system has access to your personal data, then it can influence you. It can also help you, obviously, right? Medically, for example, but that's also information that has to be treated very carefully. Privacy issues matter, but it's not about making the AI generally more intelligent. It's about making the AI able to help you or your company with the particulars of your context, right? So it could be beneficial, but it can also be used against you. And so we also need those privacy rules to work for the people.
Thank you. Yes.
Thank you so much. I imagine an international treaty is an ideal, but quite hard to get to right now.
Yes.
So I'm curious.
But it could start small. That's what I think. That's the only way it's going to work.
Sure. So my question is, right now, given where we are today, do you see any realistic room for agreement between the US and China on advanced AI? And if so, what are the kind of specific niche areas where you think that is actually possible in today's climate, putting aside the ideal future, which we all should be working towards now?
I'm not very hopeful in the short term on this. So I think the trigger to a real discussion between the US and China on advanced AI is when both parties realize that they are in the same boat with respect to some of the catastrophic risks. So that is like terrorists using AI against one of those countries, or the AI itself, if we lose control and we get rogue AIs. In both of these cases, everybody loses. It doesn't matter if you're Chinese or American, right? So long as these governments don't take these risks sufficiently seriously, then they don't have an incentive to cooperate in making commitments and so on. But it might change. There might be an accident, for example, and then they start taking it seriously. But right now, of course, I don't see those signals, so I'm not hopeful for the short term. But in the long run, as AI becomes more powerful, this becomes more likely that there will be a realization that this is a real threat.
What I take away from this session is the importance of having voices like yours as, being anchored in academia, in a not-for-profit, so without the kinds of stakes that some of the most powerful voices in the AI debate have to sort of paint the future one way or another, and the challenge that I think politicians face anywhere, which is, politics and policy is very often reacting to changed realities, but in order to avoid the worst, we need to be more anticipatory. And yes. I think for that, we need to continue to have more public leaders appreciate, the multiple scenarios, because as you said, no one has crystal balls, but just have multiple scenarios. And I think, if Law Zero and the rest of your work can contribute to that with an appreciation for both the technical solutions that, you are uniquely qualified to do, I, wouldn't begin to try to touch that, but also a respect for the role that policy and politics play in this, because it's in the abstract easy to talk about red lines, but if you've ever tried to agree on what a red line is, let's say with the people in this room, then you know that that's in and of itself a challenging process. So I'm really excited to see that you are still hopeful while you're not blind to the risks that you identify, and that you see this sort of multi-pronged approach. And I really hope that we can, hear back from you where Law Zero has reached a year from now, 2 years from now, and that we keep hope and engagement on having that global coalition of like-minded actors to actually step up and take responsibility. So please join me in thanking Professor Yoshua Bengio for his great insights.
Thank you.